Advanced Financial Modeling, Topic 12, International Finance, Learning Objective number 6. We're going to construct international carry trades and covered interest arbitrage trades with credit default swaps, CDSs. So let's talk about the yen carry trade. An international carry trade is one in which you borrow a low interest rate currency and invest in a higher interest rate currency. So throughout the 2000s, one of the most popular trades for hedge funds was the yen carry trade, when yen interest rates were about 1% and US treasuries were near 3. So here's an example. If I can borrow 1% and invest at 3%, that seems like a money machine. So if I can borrow $1 million, 1 million yen at 1% for 1 year, then immediately sell the yen for $10,000 at an exchange rate of 100 to 1. I now have $10,000. I invest in a US Treasury for 1 year at 3%. So 1 year from now, I'll have $10,300. And at the end of that year, I need to pay off my loan. That's going to be 1.01 million yen, which will cost me $10,100 as long as the exchange rate remains at 100. All right, now what profit do I earn? Well, I earn that 2%, that $200 profit. If I look at my spreadsheet, I'll come down here. We assume that today's spot price is 100 yen per dollar. It stays at 100 yen per dollar. And I'm borrowing 1 million yen at 1%, and I invest in a 3% treasury. So I borrow that 10 million yen, I immediately sell it at 100 to 1 and get $10,000, and invest in a 3% treasury and get $10,300. Then I owe, at the end of the year, 1.01 million yen, and if the exchange rate stays at 100, that'll cost me 10,100, and I have a $200 profit. So that's the yen carry trade, where I'm borrowing a foreign currency. Now let's think about this a little bit further. The big assumption here is that the only unknown at the time of putting on the trade is, what is the exchange rate 1 year from now? I'm going to borrow the yen and pay that loan. That's fixed. I know what the treasury is the day I buy them. I just don't know what the exchange rate is going to be in 1 year. What if we say that in 1 year, that exchange rate, which I assume stayed at 100, what if it behaves according to that interest rate parity model? And it's going to be 100 yen per dollar times 1 plus the yen interest rate over 1 plus the US interest rate. What if the exchange rate goes to 98.053? Well, when I go to pay back my 101 million yen at an exchange rate of 98, that's going to cost me 10,300. Now, the last example, I had this at 100 and I was making money. But if I allow the exchange rate to go according to interest rate parity, that's 10,300. Here's my proceeds from the US Treasury. I have zero profit. If I were to do this in the spreadsheet, all I would have to say is that I don't get 100. I have a little link here to the formula for interest rate parity. Or we can just type it in there. What if we say that new exchange rate is that times 1 plus the yen interest rate divided by 1 plus the US interest rate. And notice that new exchange rate, 98.053, makes my profits go away. So back to here. If exchange rates move according to interest rate parity, you cannot ever have profits from a carry trade, because the currency with the higher interest rates is going to be the currency with the lowest interest rates is going to be the one that appreciates. So when you borrow that low interest rate, when you go to repay the loan, it's going to be at a higher exchange rate, and so it's going to offset. So that's a problem. And there's the example there with the 98.053. So a successful yen carry trade involves borrowing at a low interest rate in which there's a structural impediment to prevent the exchange rate to move according to interest rate parity. Well, for Japan, what that could be is maybe the government is managing their exchange rate to not allow it to appreciate, or there may be some other elements going on that don't allow the exchange rate to appreciate according to interest rate parity. Now, also, Wall Street gets a little greedy with this trade, in that what they can start doing is when they borrow yen, they can invest in, say, not just US Treasuries, why not just US stocks or US real estate or emerging market stocks or emerging market debt? So in that case, it's no longer a relatively safe investment. You are now subject to whatever happens to the exchange rate, but also whether or not that bond or that that equity has a sufficient return. So this is the carry trade. Now I want to transition over to something called a covered interest arbitrage trade, which is basically the exact same thing as a carry trade, except you don't just wait around for the exchange rate to happen, say wait around to buy yen to pay off the loan at the end of the year. When you put on the trade in day one, you enter into a forward contract to lock in the exchange rate. So the example we just did, what if I borrow a foreign currency, say yen, sell the yen, buy the dollars, and invest in a US Treasury, but then immediately at the same time enter into a forward contract to buy the yen back, selling the dollar in forward markets, and that way you have enough to pay off the loan. So it's just this one extra step is the difference between a carry trade and a covered interest arbitrage, because what you're doing is you're covering your risk position by entering into a forward contract to buy the foreign currency, in this case the yen, to pay off the loan. But you can also do the covered interest arbitrage on the other direction. You could say borrow the domestic currency. We could borrow dollars, use the dollars to buy a foreign currency, invest in a foreign bond, and then enter into a contract to sell the proceeds of the foreign bond back to dollars. So let's do that example right here. What if you want to do a covered interest arbitrage, borrowing US dollars and invest, go back to the top here, and invest in a US Treasury. Say the spot price of and this is going to be Pakistan. What if the spot price is 86.01 Pakistan rupee per dollar, and the forward price is 88. And say you're going to borrow $1,000. Pakistan interest rates are 9.44%. US interest rates are 4.98%. So what you're going to do is you're going to borrow $1,000 and buy rupee immediately and get 86,000 rupee. Then immediately invest the rupees at the Pakistan interest rate of 9.44, and you're expected to have 94,000 rupees next year. So you enter into a forward contract to sell 94,000 rupees at a forward price of 88. So now you're guaranteed 1,069. And then you pay off your loan, the US dollar loan, with $1,000 at 1.0498, and you make, looks like, a sure profit of 1966, assuming this bond does not default. So that's our example of a covered interest arbitrage borrowing in US dollars. All right, what if you borrow in the foreign currency? So here's an example of doing a covered interest arbitrage, and we're going to borrow in yen, but cover our position. This is going to be exactly the same position I just did a minute ago when I was talking about the yen carry trade. And the only difference is when I said, well, wait around and see what the exchange rate is and pay off the loan. Well, what if the forward rate is 98.053, which is the interest rate parity number, and in that case, there is just no profits. Now, the only one more example I want to do is a credit default swap, adding a covered interest arbitrage with a credit default swap, or what we say is a CIA with a CDS. So a CDS, credit default swap, is a contract that makes payments to the buyer of the CDS if a specified bond defaults. So for example, you buy the Pakistan bond, and if it defaults, it promises to give you back the par amount. All right, so the buyer pays the periodic premiums the buyer pays periodic premiums just like insurance. So what this does is the CDS contracts can be used to guarantee the payment of the corporate bond or a government bond, and the cost is paid over the life of the bond. So, for example, if the contract specifies you pay 50 basis points of par at each annual coupon payment date, and it guarantees the payment of contractual interest and par. So I pay a 0.5% of the value of the Pakistan bond every year, and it guarantees me both the interest and par payments. So what we could do is when we go back and think about borrowing dollars and buying a Pakistan bond, it wasn't exactly arbitrage because the Pakistan bond could default. We'll say that's not risk free. However, at the exact same time, you enter into a contract, a CDS, to buy, to guarantee the contract. So let's take a look. Back to our example with the Pakistan bond. Spot price is 86. Forward price is 88. You're going to borrow $1,000. U.S. Pakistan interest rate's 944, and the U.S. interest rate is 498. And they quote you the price of the PKR bond CDS is 2.5%. How they quote that is it's not a price, it's actually the annual premium. So it's kind of it's almost like a car insurance price. They're quoting you the premium, and the premium is a percentage of how much you're insuring. So back to our problem, our borrowing dollars and buying a Pakistan bond. I borrow $1,000 and buy 86,000 Pakistan rupees. I invest that at 944, but I don't get my 94,000 anymore. Notice I have a calculation here. I'm going to gain 9.44%, but I'm going to pay the CDS. I'm paying 2.5% of my 944 to guarantee the payment of the bond. So I don't get all 944. I only get about seven of that. And so I get 91,979. I then convert that. I have a forward contract to sell 91,979 rupees at 88. And here's the payment of my US dollar bond. And now I'm actually losing money. So what I thought was arbitrage and I'm making money is really just taking the risk of the Pakistan bond defaulting. So this would be the covered interest arbitrage profits, including a CDS cost. All right, and the last topic we'll talk about computing the return and volatility improvements from a domestic or a global optimal portfolio. One more chance to use solver.